Here we are at question one of section one, which is the reading comprehension section from LSAT PrepTest 158. And we are going to engage in an upfront passage read and highlighting the main idea sentences for the passage, irrespective of question one, by selecting the passage only view. We already have the pink highlighter selected, so we are going to read the first paragraph up front without highlighting and then critically determine which single sentence is most important to that paragraph that captures the author's perspective best before deciding if we need one additional sentence to gather appropriate context. So, starting with that opening paragraph, a major problem facing industrial societies is their exponentially increasing production of toxic waste. Environmental regulations and expenses for landfills and incinerators have increased significantly in recent years. In an effort to save time and money, many industries have turned to alternative methods of hazardous waste disposal, including increased use of deep well injection. In this method, wells are drilled into porous and permeable rock strata that are already saturated with salt water. Liquid wastes are then injected into the rock strata. Most of these wells are drilled to a depth of at least 300 meters, the minimum depth that generally puts the injected waste at a safe distance below any aquifer, in this case, a rock stratum containing drinkable water. Such wells are rarely deeper than 1,800 meters because below this depth, it is more cost effective to consider an alternative method of disposal. Deep well injection, which has been used to some extent since the 1930s, have become a matter of controversy as growing numbers of communities come to rely on underground sources of drinking water. The controversy arises because there are three serious problems with this method of waste disposal. So, it truly is these final two sentences that get to the author's point about deep well injection, even though there is a lot of detail prior to that in the opening paragraph here. And this is a common structure for the LSAT. The opening paragraph, they try to get you bogged down in the details as opposed to focusing solely on the topic in the way that the author wishes to discuss it. So we are actually going to highlight first this penultimate sentence because saying that deep well injection is a matter of controversy is definitely the author's kind of conclusion that the rest of the paragraphs are going to have to support. And I'd probably highlight this next sentence because it alludes to what is likely to come in the subsequent paragraphs, which will be the three serious problems, and focus our subsequent highlighting on gathering those specific problems. If we need details about this deep well injection, we'll just have to come back and targeted reread. But we understand that the details about how deep well injection works are not relevant to the overall main idea in the same way that these final two sentences are. So we will continue by reading the second paragraph, and then after finishing it, we will consider which sentence or sentences continue the narrative from the first paragraph highlights. Under the best conditions, wastes are injected into rock strata saturated with salt water and separated by impermeable rock strata from aquifers containing drinkable water. However, injection wells may leak, allowing significant amounts of noxious chemicals to mix with supplies of drinking water. In other cases, mistakes by personnel working on the wells may lead to the pollution of aquifers. In one such case, workers installing a 500-meter deep well left a gap along approximately 30 meters of its steel casing. This allowed waste to escape at a depth of only 200 meters, threatening a regional aquifer supplying water to 100,000 people. Because such accidents take place deep within the earth, people may be exposed to dangerous levels of waste materials for long periods of time before the problem is even discovered. So we know that our second sentence from the first paragraph that we highlighted was talking about the problems. And we are really just describing those problems in this second paragraph. And we'll want to highlight the two sentences and only the two sentences that describe those problems. But you can stay away from highlighting this, however, just because within the structure of our highlights, the narrative will get a little bit wonky. So you can always just kind of skip over transition terms to make the narrative from one highlighted excerpt to another highlighted excerpt flow a little bit better. But we're definitely going to highlight this sentence that states injection wells may leak, and the sentence following it that states that mistakes by personnel working on the wells may lead to the pollution of aquifers as two of the three problems we highlighted as existing from the first paragraph. So I just clicked next page to frame up the second paragraph with the final two paragraphs, and we'll read the third paragraph next, again trying to understand our overall narrative before highlighting the single sentence that best continues that narrative about the problems with deep well injection. So, the third problem associated with deep well injection arises from the fact that it is nearly impossible to predict how the injected waste will be acted on by the geological features of the injection area. Unlike surface water, the water in underground rock strata does not flow entirely under the influence of gravity. Moving along subterranean pressure gradients, it can flow in any direction and, in some cases, can be transported thousands of meters per year through geologic faults, porous rock, or other geologic formations. Now, this one's relatively straightforward, I would argue. We're definitely going to want to highlight the topic sentence, and generally, it's either the first sentence or the last sentence that is most often the highlighted sentences. But you can see that in some instances, as was the case in paragraph 2, you may find it in the meat of the paragraph as well. But I would say that just summarizing this third problem is probably sufficient for our highlight of the third paragraph. And then the final paragraph, the significant uncertainty about where injected waste will flow, along with the possibilities of mechanical failure and human error, makes deep well injection a risky means of managing hazardous wastes. Unfortunately, as societies produce more toxic waste, industry will rely increasingly upon this relatively cheap, efficient means of disposal. So, the author, I would argue, kind of summarizes the argument in its entirety in these two sentences. And we said at the outset, you can highlight up to two sentences. I would say that you want both of these sentences. So don't feel that it just because you only have a two sentence paragraph that you need to minimize the amount of highlighting. In fact, you still want to rely on the metric of it's got to be 1 to 2 sentences. But as our final step, we will go back and reread our pink highlights to confirm that they capture the overall main idea of the paragraph, understanding that we may have to read for details in subsequent questions. So, starting at the top with deep well injection, which has been used to some extent since the 1930s, has become a matter of controversy as growing numbers of communities come to rely on underground sources of drinking water. The controversy arises because there are three serious problems with this method of waste disposal. Injection wells may leak, allowing significant amounts of noxious chemicals to mix with supplies of drinking water. In other cases, mistakes by personnel working on the wells may lead to the pollution of aquifers. The third problem associated with deep well injection arises from the fact that it is nearly impossible to predict how the injected waste will be acted on by the geological features of the injection area. The significant uncertainty about where injected waste will flow, along with the possibilities of mechanical failure and human error, makes deep well injection a risky means of managing hazardous waste. Unfortunately, as societies produce more toxic waste, industry will rely increasingly upon this relatively cheap, efficient means of disposal. And after rereading it, hopefully you agree that we are ready to move on to the questions, and our next video will allow us to engage with question 1